Can I ask Ben to clarify? Are you saying that you should pursue your desires no matter where it ends? Like, would you form a support group for suicide? Not to say we're here for you not to do this, but if you want to, just go ahead and.
Sorry.
I just need clarification. Would you tell the suicide, one with suicidal thoughts, that if that's what you desire, please, by all means, fulfill your desires? What are we saying? I'm just.
It depends. I believe in assisted suicide, but I think that's a separate case. No, I think that people that desire to kill themselves are suffering from mental illness, and when we know that, and why do we call that a mental illness? But we understand what human well-being is supposed to look like, and we could get into hours of what constitutes crazy people from not crazy people, but there's a bell curve, and we understand what is mainstream Homo sapien behavior, and we understand what kind of behavior is going to constitute a good society, and so a support group is absolutely.
So you're saying you believe in assisted suicide but not autonomous suicide? Like if he wants to commit suicide alone in his room, would you support that or not?
Do I believe it should be illegal? I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Not illegal, just morally permissible, and you would encourage him to follow his desire.
I think it's immoral to not try to stop that person for other people. But I think if they desire to kill themselves, they're clearly not capable of making that decision. But I think we have a moral imperative to try and help them.
So we have a moral imperative to stop them if they're going to try to kill themselves in their dorm room, but we have a moral imperative to help them if they're on life support or...
They're beyond help at that point, medical help.
So medical help is...
And they can make the decision that it's a amount of suffering. It's okay for there to be gray area. It's okay for these questions to be difficult.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Question from this side. In the back.
Yeah, I don't...
Name first, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm Peter. I'm actually a physics graduate student.
Whoa! Can we have some humanities in here?
This is for Ben, because I was struck earlier when you asked about are there reasons to believe in a God. And Brad, I think, gave some legitimate historical evidence for why Jesus died and resurrected. And then you said, well, that doesn't actually mean that there's a God. So I guess I'm wondering what your definition of God is, because in my scientist self, I would say that no natural person can die and rise again. That must be a God. So
Why must it be a God?
Try to get back to the overall question, like, what is a God then?
Well, I think I'm defining God the same way, but what you're doing is ascribing meaning. So if I predict the future and I say it's because God told me, you don't have any evidence to suggest that God actually told me that, other than that I'm telling the truth. Or I might even think I'm telling the truth. But that doesn't mean that I'm right, that God really told me. I could commit what we would consider as a supernatural act, something that would be astonishing, phenomenal. Miracles are a dime a dozen, go unexplained. We know this today all the times. But we don't necessarily, if the person claims it and says, it's because my dog told me to. We don't believe that the dog told them to. Why is God put it in any other pedestal?
I really want to say that if we'd had, I wish we'd had a little more time to talk back and forth after that initial part, because the evidence that was given wasn't evidence at all. I mean, it was making assumptions based out of historical text that is not historical in nature in the way that we think of history today, and just especially basing things on, for instance, the idea of, these people really believed it so much they're willing to go to their death. Well, Brad and Junyi are not Muslims, and yet there were people, the early expansion of Islam happened during a period where people deeply believed their religious tradition was kind of expanding across the face of the earth as well. But to base that just on this idea that, people who believe in something enough they're willing to die for it, is evidence that a guy was able to overcome the laws of the world and be able to rise from the dead, I think is pretty bad evidence. In any other case besides when someone has been is operating out of a religious standpoint, anywhere else we would say that's really bad evidence.
Can I comment? I think just historically, the context of the spread of Islam is very different from the spread of Christianity, in that someone was willing to go fight a war and end up dying in the name of religion, versus preach a message and tell what they believe was the truth and die.
That didn't happen in Christianity? The Crusades, they weren't going to fight a war.
This is the first. I'm speaking about first century. I'm not just referring to the biblical text, which you discredit as non-historical in the same sense that we receive it, but it is a historical text nonetheless.
the text that exists in a historical context is not a historical text by its methodology. I mean, parts of it are, but
not by your modern methodology, but in terms of ancient text, is this an unusual text compared to other historical texts of that time, or text of a historical time?
Well, no, but our idea of what history is itself is different. But part of that doesn't help your case, because there's wiggle room in a lot of these historical documents from the first century and before that we wouldn't allow today. And so to say that there's historical truth in the fact of people and places and times and dates and all those kind of things being accurate in those texts is even harder to believe 2,000 years later now than it would have been at that particular time.
And don't forget, God could during that time, God could have appeared to the Chinese. They had a concept of history, and they were highly literate. They could have taken it down word for word. The Chinese Jesus could have written down everything that he wanted to say, but he decided to appear in the illiterate part of the Middle East.
Are you familiar with the theory that Chinese characters reflect some of the biblical imagery of ancient text? And
I'm not, but if that was really scientifically sound, you'd win a Nobel Prize. So I don't have reason.
I didn't come up with it. I'm just there are reflections and symbolism in other cultures of other ancient cultures that had no contact with Judaism or Christianity that reflect a similar, what we would say is God's general revelation, putting it in the heart of a culture or individuals, and the fact that we all share the idea of human dignity is one example. The idea that there are collective, common stories that can be found in the Bible and elsewhere. We would say that's evidence of some sort.
Even though it could just as easily be evidence that these are overlaps in human cultures that exist there, and that the Christian one is just one example of all these other ones. It's not in any way more
if Christianity didn't have the
basic.
If Christianity didn't have the extraordinary claims and we would say evidence of Jesus Christ as the central figure and the things that he did and the things that he claimed and the effect of that, which goes beyond the biblical text. That's what I was saying earlier. I wasn't just using the text as evidence. I might have quoted it once. I was using the effect and the historical context that grew out of that to say this is very compelling evidence that Jesus Christ claimed to be God, and to those who believe, it's clear to us that he is. He's no mere man.
Thank you, Brent. We get a question from the middle, in the front.
Okay. You guys talked.
Please.
Yeah, you guys talked about a lot about the Mike. You guys talked a lot about the Bible and its relation to science. And I think Pastor Brad talked about Adam and Eve. I wonder, things like that, a literal Adam and Eve, a literal Garden of Eden, are those consistent with science as we know it today?
There are many Christian scientists who believe in evolution and would also say that the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden could fit in that. There's different opinions on that. I've got an opinion, but I'm not a scientist. I was a biology major in college, but I would say it's consistent. You can believe in the Bible and also believe in various accounts of how we came to.
Could you tell us about your beliefs, though?
Yes, I believe that God took either a group of people or two individuals, Adam and Eve, and made a special covenant relationship with them, so that in my framework, I don't believe that I came from primates, but I know that many Christians do believe that, and they have an internal consistency in being able to explain theistic evolution. So I would say, at the bare minimum, what I believe, in agreement with any Christian that I know, is that God has made a special covenant relationship, entering into this with what we would say are humans now, and that those humans did what the rest of God's creation couldn't do. They had a moral obligation to keep his command, and they failed it. And so, therefore, God made a promise of redemption, and he sent his son into the world to redeem this part of creation as a foretaste of how he would redeem the entire creation that had not morally fallen in breaking its relationship with him. So does that answer the question, or do you need more?
I mean, okay, good. I just don't know how it's scientific.
Yeah. So, like Pastor Brad says, there is a variety of positions among Christians, among us. I personally think that, I hold to it that I think there's something in Genesis that is definitely true, and it's true in the sense that it's authoritative for our lives, and the norms that it defines, they are authoritative for our life, for the simple fact that Jesus, who I believe is the Son of God, believes them to be authoritative. And the reason why I believe that Jesus is the Son of God is like what Pastor Brad said, it's the resurrection. And I actually think that the resurrection is a really, really good evidence because in terms of historicity, right? Like compared to like the number of manuscripts and the reliability of transmission, and the number of manuscripts we have of a lot of the Gospels and of the epistles and letters, they were all, even by critical scholars, written really fairly early. Yeah. So the Gospels were all written before 100s AD. So if you think that Jesus dies in AD 33, that means that Gospel of Mark was supposedly around AD 70. So that's like just 40 years after the events. The eyewitnesses were still alive. Compared to other historical texts that we have from that period, the testimony of the Gospels is quite remarkable. I'm not sure exactly which Roman emperor it was, but someone wants to make the quote that if you believe in this Roman emperor, maybe it's Alexander the Great. But if you believe in Alexander the Great, you should believe that what happened there really did. So that's one. And
what does this have to? So to bring back to the question being asked, though, how does your worldview then integrate?
So I believe in that. So because of my trust that Jesus is the Son of God, I trust that Genesis 1 has some meaning. But I personally hold the view that so if you look at contemporary texts of the Near East at that time, a lot of the creation stories, I believe Genesis is formulated as a theological response to the near creation myths like Enuma Elish, the Akkadian flood stories, because you look at the way that the people then understood the world, like the Genesis describes like the firmament, and then when the flood came, there were windows that opened the heaven, and I could draw a diagram, but basically the Near Eastern people at that time believed that the world was there is an underground subterranean sea, and there is land, and then there's like literally a solid sphere, and then another water body above. And so that was the concept of creation and how the world was, and that was widespread throughout the Near East, and we know that from archaeological records, from other creation myths. And I think that Genesis 1 had a specific theological response to that, because whereas in other creation myths you have gods literally killing themselves to make all of that, many multiple gods. In Genesis 1, I think the author was trying to make a theological point that there is one God. He's majestic. There was a lot of chaos. He spoke, and it came to be. There was no infighting. Creation was good. That human had inherent human dignity because God made us in His image. So,
can I follow that up with just one short point?
Josh, you want to say something?
No, I just no, that's okay.
I can say this in a couple sentences. I think that the book of Genesis was written as in the context of the redemption of the Israelite slaves from the Egyptian slavery. And so when you read the context, you also have to understand that what is being presented to the people is that they were a liberated people, and this is the roots of their liberation. And so if we find ourselves today with the question of sin or suffering like I was describing, the creation story has something to say about that as well. That God created us to be free people, but we find ourselves in a situation of bondage and suffering. And this is one of the seminal texts that explains how we become free as God's people.
Thank you. And we have a very patient hand in the back. If you say your name and question.
My name is Alex, and this question is for the pro-God side. Do you believe that God is active in the world today? And if so, how?
Yes, I do believe God is active today. Numerous ways. One is through His people. So when we hear the command of God to go and serve the poor, love our enemy, love our wives, we do that acting out His commands in essentially embodying His interaction in the world. Also, I believe in miracles. Ben says miracles are a dime a dozen. I wonder if any of you have experienced what some people might call a miracle and you can't explain, but just the fact of my conversion story is what I would say is a miraculous event that can't be explained in naturalistic ways. And so there have been maybe 2 or 3 other events in my life that I would say, to me, are clear experiences of God intervening that I can't explain naturalistically or materialistically. And I'll pass it to Jun Yi.
Yeah,